was a young boy, horror movies scared the crap out of me. I could not watch them, I could barely hear people talk about them, describing them. I would have nightmares just by watching trailers online or on TV. I was a scaredy cat, and I was deeply disturbed just by nothing, pretty much. But then I started watching some very light movies, like horror films that had action elements in it, The Mummy, Van Helsing, those kinds of films. And then I slowly started to build up my confidence and my sensitivity with these films, and I ended up watching stronger and stronger horror films, more famous ones, more obscure ones, foreign ones, a whole bunch of them. And in the end, after, let's just say, just a couple of years of watching proper horror films, I became a massive fan of the genre. And now I've seen over 500 horror movies, I keep on watching more and more of them, I really love them. And yes, a lot of the ones that come out are not good, but there are so many great ones. And one of the things I've asked the most, I think, when talking about films, especially with people who are not used to horror films, is how do you find enjoyment in them? How do you actually like being scared? And my answer is usually it's not about being scared per se. There comes a moment when you're watching so many horror films, you become desensitized, and a lot of things don't even hit you anymore. But if you have a proper narrative, if you have good characters, if everything is set up in a good way, you can get some absolutely masterful films. But otherwise, if you aren't used to it, even like the cheapest, stupidest horror film with loud jump scares will scare the crap out of you. But this is what I wanted to talk about today. I want to talk about 50 horror films that I really love and that I think are a good introduction to the genre. I've been wanting to make this video for a while. I'm probably shooting this a few days before actually uploading it, because this is going to require a lot of editing for once, a lot of work. But it's something I always wanted to do because, again, a lot of people have asked me about it. What should I watch? What do you recommend? I'm too scared to watch them. You probably are right now, but you're gonna get used to it and you're probably gonna enjoy it. You just have to find your own niche, your own type of horror films you enjoy. And the beauty of this list, in my opinion, is that it has a good variety of films, both foreign and of different genres. And instead of making a weird-ass order, I decided, you know what? Let's just go in chronological order. I'm gonna start off from the 1920s and we're gonna end up to the 2010s. And there's only going to be 2 films from the 2010s because I didn't want to get to the more recent ones. I didn't want to talk about like Hereditary, The Witch, It Follows, all those films, Lighthouse. I didn't want to talk about them because it's like that you already know about them, that you're aware of them. So I wanted to shed a light on some lesser known, still great horror films that maybe you've never heard of. So without further ado, after this long intro, let's get to what's probably going to be one of the longest videos I've ever made. Let's start things off with The Cabinet of Dr Caligari, released in 1920 by Robert Wiene, and this is a German expressionist film, silent film of course. It's absolutely gorgeous, the way it was shot, the way it was crafted. German expressionism has always loved these exaggerated sets, very surreal, oniric settings and narratives, and in this one the character of Cesare is one of the earliest horror icons, and boy, he's been the inspiration for many characters to come. 1922's Nosferatu is one of the earliest vampire films, and in my opinion, still one of the greatest. The performance by Max Schreck as the titular Count is disturbing and creepy as hell in many ways. The direction by Murnau is terrific. I still think this is probably my favorite silent film of all time. It's just so well paced, so tense. The lighting, the cinematography, there are some immense uses of shadows in this film that are wonderful. And just for the main performance itself, it's worth watching. accent by Benjamin Christensen. It's a weird beast. It's both a horror film and also a documentary, and the interesting element of this is that it combines witchcraft with mental illness. So you see the evolution of witchcraft through time and how people in civilization reacted to it, but in the end it ends up connecting it to mental illness and how everything that was kind of horrific and disturbing, the way people saw witchcraft and crazy women, it was actually just the lack of understanding of science and of medical care, that some people just need help and support instead of being condemned and recognized as being possessed by the devil or working for a goat. Wonderful film though. 1941's Frankenstein is arguably the most famous iteration of the character. Boris Karloff, absolutely legendary in the role, directed by James Whale. I personally am not the biggest fan of this one compared to other Frankenstein films, but I still think it's gorgeously shot. The sets of the castle, of the laboratory, the iconic lines like it's alive and all of that, it's wonderful. And there are some genuinely human moments in this, especially when Frankenstein meets a little girl by the lake. It's an iconic film, it's the definition of iconic, and just for that it's worth a watch, and it's also one of the better early adaptations of a novel that has been made.
It's moving. It's alive. It's alive. It's alive. It's moving. It's alive. Oh, it's alive. It's alive. It's alive. It's alive. Oh, in the name of God. Now I know what it feels like to be God. Oh.
Todd Browning's Freaks is a borderline horror film because it's the kind of film that could easily fall into the people with disabilities, people who are different and weird, they are the monsters, but the key theme of the film is that they may look monstrous, but they are not monsters. It's actually other people that are monsters that can be inhuman. And it's a delightful film. I think the cast of characters here is delightful, terrific, just very charming, and once it gets into the more disturbing elements, it never feels cheap or exploitative, it always feels earned, and it ends with one of the most satisfying yet haunting images I've seen in a horror film.
We'll make her one of us, a loving cup, a loving cup. We accept her one of us, we accept her one of us.
Gooba gobble, gooba gobble.
We accept her, we accept her. Google gobble, Google gobble. One of us, one of us. Google gobble.
They're going to make you one of them, my peacock.
The first cinematic venture of King Kong in 1933 is one of my favorite monster films. Even though, of course, the effects have aged in the sense that you can actually understand and conceive how they were made, I think it still aged very well, like the use of puppets, the use of masks, the use of animatronics. It's just seamlessly used, and it makes for an exciting film, a rollicking adventure, with also a couple really tense moments in it. Yes, the portrayal of the indigenous people of Skull Island is... it's not aged good, it hasn't aged well, but everything else around it I think is still very much worth a watch. And I mean, it's an absolute classic in its own right. If you've seen the Peter Jackson version, he's been inspired a lot by this one more than any other adaptation, and I still think it's the finest, easily. One of the only sequels on this list, Bride of Frankenstein, again by James Whale, I think it's way better than the original Frankenstein, which is already a good film in its own right. But this one is funny as hell. This one is very self-aware. It has a really fun cast of characters. You have Frankenstein's monster attempting to talk. You have, of course, the Bride of Frankenstein that only comes in towards the end, but it's worth the wait. And it's easily, I would say, even more so than the original one, this is more influential, especially if you've seen Young Frankenstein. It takes more from this film than from the other 1941 film.
Friend? Friend?
Now we have a Jacques Tourneur double bill of films, starting with Cat People, more famously being one of the early examples of a jump scare or a fake scare with a bus just coming into frame with a loud screeching noise that makes you jump in your seat. But more than just being having a really effective jump scare, I think it's a story that gets under your skin. You're never sure if what's going on in this tale of hereditating ancient curses and things like that. It's very human, which is also the core of other films by the director. They're all very human tales, more focused on the characters than a proper narrative with twists and turns. And this one has a couple moments, especially one in a pool setting, that are some of the tensest scenes from the 1940s. And then you get a walk with a zombie. It's very great because when you get something like King Kong, portrayal of indigenous people is aged very poorly. But in this case, in the film, you have this rich woman going on this island with a lot of native people still living there. And it's kind of a strong criticism on colonialism, on the control of the white people over native populations. And it's touching, again, but made by Turner. It's very touching film, very human tale, with a very, very memorable zombie figure at the center of it. That it's like you'll never forget. And then you get Godzilla 1954 by Ishiro Honda, one of the finest monster movies ever made. Not because you get a lot of monster mayhem and destruction, which is there, and it's wonderful, exquisite use of miniatures and just a person in a costume. But the most impressive thing is how much you actually care about the human characters, which a lot of modern monster movies just forget or don't care about. It's all about spectacle, including the more recent Godzilla films. This one was just a delight to watch, absolutely. And the critique of nuclear armaments, of nuclear power, the atomic bomb and what the Americans did, it still resonates in a very strong way because it was made in such an earnest way. So yeah, definitely, I will probably say my favorite monster film of all time, and for good reason. Henri-Georges Clouzot's Les Diaboliques from 1955. It's shockingly beautiful. Clouzot is often touted as being the French equivalent of Hitchcock, and I can definitely see that comparison, even though they are very different as far as directing goes. But the way Clouzot crafts tension, you have these characters, these two women who plot to kill a man, but once they actually manage to do that, things take a darker turn, maybe a supernatural turn, and you're never sure what's really going on up until the end, which is both very satisfying, conclusory, but also kind of open, and I would say chilling. And just the two performances at the center of this are a thing of beauty, some of my favorite performances from the 50s.
Ce n'est pas une histoire de fou, c'est une histoire diabolique.
Qui est là?
Allô, allô, qui est là? Répondez, nom de Dieu.
Another French classic is Eyes Without a Face, Yeux sans visage, which is also the title of a song. And the standout moment in this film is easily a surgery scene that is one of the best instances of gore from the early days of cinema. And even then, to be honest, in 1960s it was even that early, comparatively speaking. But boy, that's disturbing and is aged wonderfully. Just as much as the story itself. This story, more than being a disturbing and scary one, it's a sad and poignant tale of a disfigured woman trying to get a better life, of two crazy people murdering, trying to build their new face. And as far as it is disturbing, it is also, again, very sad, very lonely film, which makes for a nice change of tone and pace compared to other horror films on the list. And now an interesting double feature would be pairing Peeping Tom with Psycho. And Peeping Tom by Michael Powell of Powell and Pressburger fame. This is very, very similar to Hitchcock's American equivalent. But the beauty of Powell's film is that it's much more focused on the villain. You barely spend time with any of the other characters. And so it becomes kind of an anti-hero, a troubled mind, an obsession for the camera, of keeping certain images alive forever. It's, I would say, far more disturbing than Psycho was, and unfortunately it was so shocking for the time that they destroyed copies, they prohibited it, so it only became more famous and gained more popularity only in the recent decades. But that's a crying shame, an absolute shame, and it killed Powell's career, because he made something bold and strong, and boy, what a film.
I want to.
What about the customers?
Don't be shy. For me, it's my first time too.
Yours?
In front of eyes like... eyes as full of...
And then you get Psycho, another tale that's this time around more focused on the heroes of the story, with a crazy twist plot change halfway through that everyone knows about, with a killer reveal that's just a thing of legends. But yes, the story of Norman Bates in this motel, of Norma Bates, of Marion Crane. It's, you already know about it, you've most likely already seen Psycho, but if you haven't, it's, well, the granddaddies of slasher cinema, and definitely well worth your time.
Well, I run the office, and tend the cabins and grounds, and do little errands for my mother, the ones she allows I might be capable of doing.
Do you go out with friends?
Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
Jack Clayton's The Innocents is one of my favorite ghost stories, including also one of my favorite young evil characters that you have in a film. You know, like these dastardly, devilish young kids. played by the same kid who was the leader in Village of the Damned from 1960. This tale of a governess trying to take care of these two children in this big-ass mansion. Is she seeing ghosts? Is she just losing her mind? Is there some kind of sexual repression going on? Who knows? But it's a wonderful film. Again, haunting, just like the best ghost stories are. And another really impressive ghost story is Carnival Souls from 1962. This film is seldom talked about, but it's wholly impressive. Made with a shoestring budget, director Herc Harvey made a truly inspirational film, one that gets under your skin, a tale of paranoia, of a disturbed psyche, what's real, what isn't real, what happened, what didn't happen. Those are like, you keep on changing your opinion about the protagonist the longer the film goes on. It's barely an hour long, it just flies by so quickly, and I consider it to be an absolute brilliant example of independent filmmaking, especially considering it was the 60s. So yes, it's truly brilliant stuff. Another famous ghost story, and the 60s were all about ghosts, I guess, is The Haunting from 1963. And you're probably more familiar with both the 1990s version with Liam Neeson and Catherine Zeta-Jones, or the more recent, quite different adaptation from the novel called The Haunting of Hill House on Netflix, which is terrific in its own right. But the first adaptation of Shirley Jackson's novel is quite great in building suspense, in building these four characters stuck in a mansion trying to record paranormal activity. Again, just like the other ghost stories that we've seen so far, ghosts are never just scary in itself. They're always something about the character's past starting to haunt them, their own psyche starting to collapse. And even here, are there ghosts? Aren't there ghosts? Who knows? But that's not the key meaning behind it. It's not the key theme behind it. And this is also one of the best examples, I think, of having LGBT characters without explicitly saying so, because that was too strong for the times. Just, great stuff, great stuff.
Hold my hand, Theo. For God's sake, don't scream.
Now let's move for a second to the country of Japan, and we are here with a horror anthology by Masaki Kobayashi, 1964's Widen. And Widen, I'm gonna say this, Widen is a long film, it's 3 hours long, and all of the stories are well told, they're very haunting, different types of ghost stories, but the standout element of the film are the visuals. This is one of the prettiest colored films I have seen. It's just outstanding. It embraces the artifice of the sets and the backdrops and the costumes. It embraces that and owns it, making for different color schemes for each story, making for some very, very disturbing ghostly moments that have been later on taken again by films like The Ring and The Grudge. So this was definitely an influential film, and of the Japanese horror films I've seen, This is probably one of my favorite ones, especially of the older days. Propulsion by Roman Polanski, part of the Apartment trilogy. It's a stellar showcase for Catherine Deneuve's performance, but also, again, this fractured psyche, a woman repressed sexually, starting to slowly lose her mind. And this film was made for a cheap budget, but the way the apartment of Deneuve's character changes, if you start thinking about him in the current virus situation, this feels very, very pertinent to these days, with people slowly going insane, staying inside their houses. But there's more to it. It's also a history of trauma, history of abuse, and just her performance alone is worth watching. But the way things slowly unravel, the way the house starts to change, and you have a piece of chicken that's going rotten, it's delightfully disgusting and truly memorable piece of cinema. And now for a little anomaly, we have Ingmar Bergman's only proper horror film, which is Hour of the Wolf. And Hour of the Wolf is as far removed from a horror film as you can imagine, and that's probably the main reason why it's worth checking out and seeking it, because Bergman has always made very tense and eerie films, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally so. And the only time he actually embraced the horror genre, he made this with absolutely brilliant stellar performances by the late Max von Sydow and Liv Ullmann as a couple on this island. He's a writer, and the ghosts that are in this film, the ending especially, it's the stuff of nightmares, because it's made by someone who did not want to make necessarily a proper horror film, and yet he made something more effective than other horror directors ever tried to attempt. And now another Roman Polanski film, but this is an absolute classic, is Rosemary's Baby, another part of the Apartment trilogy. And Rosemary's Baby is just Mia Farrow's performance, John Cassavetes as well, as this couple, newlyweds. They go in this new apartment building. There are creepy neighbors, there are creepy things going on, and she gets pregnant, but something seems to be wrong in her pregnancy. Some accidents start to happen around her, and who knows, maybe a cult is behind it. And the level of paranoia that is felt in this film, I would say it's unparalleled, and sympathy as well. It's on a all-time high.
I was sleeping.
Come with us quietly, Rosemary. Don't argue or make a scene.
We finally get to the proper granddaddy of zombie films. Zombies in the way that we intend them as the living dead, people who come back from the afterlife to just feed on human meat. And that is 1968's Night of the Living Dead by George Romero. And Romero was an absolute master of horror cinema. And with this film that was so cheap to make, he crafted easily one of the most perfect horror films ever, with a black lead that is strong and powerful, which made for a very empowering stance at the time, very unusual. with characters who all have clear intentions, clear motivations. You feel for all of them, even for the shitty ones, because we would all panic in this situation. Some would be stronger, some would be living in fear and trying to protect their family at all costs. And it is about the humans more than the zombies themselves, even though there are some absolutely memorable and fantastic, tense siege moments in this. We've now reached the 70s with Nicholas Roeg's Don't Look Now. This is a wonderful masterclass in editing if I've ever seen one. But not only that, but it's one of my favorite tales of grief, of loss that I've ever put on film. The story of a couple played by Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie. They've lost their daughter and they're grieving together in different ways while they are working in Venice. And this is absolutely one of the least scary but also most scary films on this list. I can easily see someone watching this and saying, this isn't really a horror film, it's more of a drama, it's more of a mystery. But the last few minutes of this film just make you rethink everything you've just experienced and puts a different light on the events. And also it has one of the most wonderful blind characters ever on a film. And it's both creepy and endearing in equal measures. And also there is an iconic sex scene in this that is as steamy as it gets. Often touted as the scariest film ever made, William Friedkin's The Exorcist I don't personally find scary, and that's not a hot take. But the thing is, after having watched the film multiple times, after having even read the novel, watched a lot of documentaries about the making of the film, both William Friedkin and the writer William Peter Blatty, they didn't want to make a horror film. And I think going into this with that mindset, knowing this is more of a drama, more about a family trying to cope with a daughter's mental illness, with a priest who has lost faith trying to regain it, using his sanity and using science, but also having to resort to the power of religion and faith. I think it's an immensely powerful story, probably my favorite horror story ever told. The performances, mind-blowing by literally everyone in the film, they're so good. The iconic soundtrack, I love it so much, it's so good. And it is, unfortunately, it's been parodied and shown out of context so many times that the more disturbing elements have lost their power as far as visuals go. But I think the strength of the film is that you care so much about what's happening to the characters, about what's happening to little Reagan and her mother, that it works on an inherently human level, more so than any amount of gore or disgusting content would ever make it.
I'm not Reagan.
I see. Well, then let's introduce ourselves. I'm Damien Karras.
And I'm the devil. Now kindly undo these straps.
If you're the devil, why not make the straps disappear?
That's much too vulgar display of power, Karras.
We are now halfway through the list, and we're getting into the slasher territory, starting with Texas Chainsaw Massacre by Tobe Hooper. And Texas Chainsaw Massacre, again, similar to The Exorcist, it's become a bit victim of its own fame. This is not a gory movie. It is violent in the sense that violence does happen, but there's barely any on screen, there's virtually no blood being spilled in this. but it's the effectiveness of the sound design, of the cinematography, of the sets, because the main house in this film is absolutely disgusting and horrible, and it feels so real, so lived in, also due to the rawness and grittiness of the visuals. It's absolutely stellar horror filmmaking. The chase scenes as well, they remain so scary, and Leatherface is one of my favorite horror villains of all time. He's become a big joke over the years, unfortunately, but in this film is just disturbing and nasty, as well as the rest of his family. It's just chilling just thinking about it. Bob Clark's Black Christmas is one of the earliest examples of holiday-themed horror films, and I would still consider it to be my second favorite kind of film like that, and easily the best Christmas-themed horror film. A killer is inside a sorority house, the girls slowly start being killed one by one, and he keeps on calling on the phone, and those phone calls, they get under your skin. The content is nasty, but the voice, it's disturbing and realistic. And I would say that more so than other films on this list, this has one single shot, and if you've seen the film you know what I'm talking about. But there is one shot that gave me nightmares for so many days. It's stellar, it's so good, it's so good.
I know you're doing Billy! Your answer is Billy!
Who are you? For God's sake, what are you doing?
I know what you did, Billy! Filthy Billy! 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 Billy!
Stop this! Oh, Jesus Christ. Mrs. Mack? Mrs. Mack, are you home? Mrs. Mack, are you up there?
And now we get a double bill from Italy, courtesy of Dario Argento, starting with Deep Red, Profondo Rosso. And this is it's one of my favorite giallo films of all time. Again, this one has one shot in it that I found to be incredibly unnerving and distressing the first time I saw it. And even on repeat viewings, it still gets me every time. One of my favorite killer reveals. But the soundtrack by Goblin, the build-up to each kill that is in the film, the mystery that's being unraveled by this journalist, it's captivating, it's engrossing, and it is very disturbing, I think. Even though there's still an element of playfulness and silliness at play that makes it more effective and even more enjoyable than it would have otherwise. And the other Argento classic is Suspiria, which I prefer slightly less than Deep Red, but is nonetheless well deserving of its classic status, of this covenant of witches that is running a dance school. Again, Goblin, it slays with the soundtrack and the quality of the music in here. There are so many disturbing and memorable moments in this, but the use of color especially, this was groundbreaking and revolutionizing at the time, and it still looks absolutely banging, even though narratively it's incredibly light, purposely so. It's meant to be kind of a dreamy film, but if you want a good counterpoint to that, I would recommend the remake that came out in 2018. Still worth checking out, but the original is on a league of its own.
Has it been raining this hard for long?
Half an hour.
Another 1977 film is Eraserhead by David Lynch. Arguably the most surreal and weird film on this list. This is very funny, this is very unnerving, it's very slow, it's bonkers in a lot of places. You get a man from another planet pulling levers, you have a lady living in the radiator, you have a weird baby creature. It's David Lynch is on a league of his own, and this is a horror film that's so unconventional, but just for how surreal and otherworldly it all is, I think it's definitely worth a watch.
Oh, you are sick.
We finally get to one of my favorite horror films on this list, and that is John Carpenter's 1978 masterpiece, Halloween. Michael Myers, from the opening flashback sequence when he was just a little kid, all shot in POV, first person, you know you're watching something special. The music is iconic, it's so good, it's so well paced, the characters, they are likable, they're funny. Jamie Lee Curtis, she was an absolute scream queen and still remains my favorite one of all time. She was terrific in this film, and the last half of the film it's a crescendo that is intense every single time. And meanwhile you have Dr. Loomis trying to find the killer before it's too late. It's just, it's so good, I love it. I absolutely adore this film and John Carpenter in general. In 1979, Ridley Scott made what is arguably the best sci-fi horror film of all time, and that is Alien. Alien is a blast. Alien is tense, Alien is disgusting, Alien is terrifying in so many ways. Similar to other films on the list, not only is the monster itself scary, how the humans react, what is happening in the background with governments and corporations not treating their workers properly, treating them as expendable. There is a lot under the surface of Alien, and other than that you get masterful sets, you get impeccable special effects. This is aged so well, even more so than other films from this time. It's just an absolute masterpiece, and still, in my opinion, the best film in the franchise. We're now in the 80s, which is a transitional period for horror cinema, but we did get one of the finest, perfect masterpieces of horror, which is Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. And I've recently been reading the book of Shining, which I have to say does paint Jack Torrance in a much better picture, it makes it more human. But one of the most fun elements of the film and most engaging ones, you can feel the darkness behind Jack Nicholson in the film. And I really love Shelley Duvall in this one, as well as the little Danny Torrance. It's, again, really well paced, tense as hell, funny, masterfully shot, some of the absolute best Steadicam shots of all time, with some sequences that are just downright unnerving, and Danny Torrance on his tricycle going around the corridor makes for a masterful mixture of long takes and sound design that just builds tension like no other film has done. Now for a lesser-known film, it's 1981's Possession by Andrzej Żuławski. And Possession, it's a weird film to explain. It's a story of a marriage that's falling apart. It's a story about the Berlin Wall and Berlin being split into two. It's about alien tentacle creatures. It's about doubles. It's about titular possession. It's about a lot of things, but as it's disturbing in the best possible way. It's one of those films that I saw like 3 years ago, and I still remember it clear as day. Every moment, it just gets under your skin in terrific ways. And the two performances by Sam Neill and especially Isabella Gianni, she gives maybe my favorite female lead performance in a horror film of all time. She gave it her whole in making this, and she had to actually wait a couple of years or a few years to recover from this performance. It was so draining emotionally and psychologically, but it made for one of the greatest performances of all time, and it was well worth it. And let's go from something very disturbing to something a bit on the lighter side with An American Werewolf in London. One of the finest dark comedies ever made. Two Americans traveling to England, one of them gets eaten by a wolf, the other one just gets bitten, and sure enough, he becomes a werewolf. And the transformation scene is a masterpiece in and of its own, but there are so many other great moments in this film. Really funny, really light. It's just thoroughly engaging and thoroughly entertaining, and it's a good introduction to the wonderful realm of horror comedies.
Can I have a piece of toast?
Get the fuck out of here, Jack.
Thanks a lot.
I can't take this. Am I asleep now, awake, or what?
I realize I don't look so hot, David. But I thought you'd be glad to see me.
The Thing is another one of my favorite John Carpenter films. Very fitting, just like Repulsion for these days, of social distancing, of paranoia. You don't know who the Thing is. You don't know who has it. You don't know who might just turn around and kill all of you. It's tense as hell, it's nail-biting, it has some of the most impressive and still wonderful practical effects ever put on screen. And the cast of characters, it's a great example of just having simple characters without a backstory to make them sympathetic. You just have charismatic actors embodying them perfectly, and you care for survival, you care for them to win this, and boy does this go in so many different places that you won't see coming, and it's a masterpiece.
It isn't Benny.
David Cronenberg made Videodrome in 1983. I don't know if he was expecting it to still be so relevant in 2020. A story of obsession with media, obsession with technology, of becoming more and more controlled by news corporations, by the media, by what we see on television or nowadays on the internet. The fusion, incredibly disturbing body horror of this film, the fusion of flesh with technology is just... Cronenberg built a career on bodies changing in unnatural ways, but Videodrome still has some of his better imagery, incredibly disturbing themes, very depressing film as well, and it's a tough watch. Also kind of satirical, which makes it a bit on the lighter side, but still impactful in so many ways, and an absolute masterpiece from a master of horror. Let's balance this out with a different kind of master of horror, in this case Sam Raimi with 1987's Evil Dead 2. I do enjoy the Evil Dead, the original one, but when you have the second one, I think that's the perfect balance of horror and comedy. And some moments are legit disturbing, some are laugh out loud hilarious. The tone keeps changing constantly, but it's never jarring, it's never a tonal whiplash that leaves you disorientated and angry with the film. It always feels worth it, it always feels earned, and Bruce Campbell is a riot in this film, an absolute riot, an unlikely hero who has to step up to fight darkness, and there's so many liquids squirting in this, it's hilarious. It's a great introduction to more splatter films, because it doesn't take itself too seriously, and that's kind of the joy of splatter. It's just like reveling in the disgustingness of all this. It's great.
Gotcha, didn't I, you little sucker?
Something a bit more memorable but also quite disturbing is Clive Barker's Hellraiser. The Cenobites are some of the most inventive and creepy creatures, monsters in horror cinema. And the franchise is not good overall because you have so many direct-to-video sequels that are just made to have Lionsgate keep the license. But the first two films, the first one especially, they are so effective in being straightforward horror films with some of the most disturbing gore I've seen in a film, for me at least, just gets under my skin and makes me revolt so strongly. I love it for that, to be honest. And also the tale itself of murder, of incest, it's just nasty, but woof, once you have Pinhead in the film, it just becomes so much better and it just elevates itself on so many levels.
The box. You opened it. We came.
It's just a puzzle box!
Oh no. It is a means to summon us.
Who are you?
Explorers in the further regions of experience. Demons to some, angels to others.
Let's go back to Japan for a little bit with another independent film, but one that's so unique. We have Tetsuo, the Iron Man, and Tetsuo is it's kind of like David Cronenberg on crack. It's a bonkers film. I've seen it a couple times and I still am not sure what happens in it, but it's a roller coaster ride of different emotions, of kind of superhero battle at the end. I don't even know what's going on, but it's such a unique, spectacular and peculiar film, made on a very small budget, that makes me just bow down to director Shinya Tsukamoto. He's an inventive director, to say the least, and Tetsuo the Iron Man, he just burst his way into the mainstream Asian cinema, and he's never stopped making unusual films. We're now in the 90s, which I consider to be kind of a lackluster period of cinema. Unfortunately, there aren't that many great horror films. There are some that I really like. Unfortunately, I'm not going to talk about Candyman, because, 50 films, but I really love Candyman. But I cannot not talk about Scream by Wes Craven. Slasher films, they got really tiring, really boring, really repetitive, really cliched. Almost instantly, as soon as Halloween, Texas Chainsaw, and Black Christmas were a thing, they already built up those tropes that got repeated endlessly in the Friday the 13th films, Nightmare films, and Wes Craven, who made Nightmare on Elm Street and other slashers like The Hills Have Eyes, he decided to make something of a parody, but the parody is still quite effective in being a damn good slasher film. It's hilarious, it's very meta, it has a colorful cast of characters that are all highly memorable and very likable in their own way. But the way this subverts expectations and the tropes of horror genre, especially with slashers, it's so much fun. It's one of the most entertaining films on the list. And I think more so than other films, this is a great introduction to the medium, even though some of the references to slashers will be lost, but that's fine.
You got a boyfriend?
Why? You want to ask me out on a date?
Maybe. Do you have a boyfriend?
No.
You never told me your name.
Why do you want to know my name?
I want to know who I'm looking at.
What did you say?
And now for the most influential found footage film of all time, which is not the first one because the first one is Cannibal Holocaust, but the most influential is undoubtedly 1999's The Blair Witch Project. Blair Witch Project is one of those films that I loved like weeks after first watching it. I saw it when I had a fever. I was so engrossed in it, but I wouldn't say in a good way back in the day when I saw it, because I ended up like having a massive headache by the end of it, and I had some of the worst nightmares of all time right afterwards. Was that the product of the fever? Was that the product of the film? I think it's a mixture of the two, but it's made for something that's just a wonderful ride. And the direction is impeccable, the performances, they are great at feeling surreal sureness, because these three actors really were in the woods with barely any direction, without knowing what to do or where to go. So the blending of reality with fiction is what truly makes this great, and one of the best examples of found footage, which later on with Paranormal Activity and other garbage like that, it became a parody of itself. And this is still the shining achievement in my opinion, together with Cannibal Holocaust.
No way.
They're all over the place.
Holy shit.
Come up here quick! I need to use the CP!
Yo, there's all sorts of shit up here, man.
Another great example of genre bending is Audition by Takashi Miike, also in 1999. This film is known by everyone for the, let's just say, interesting climax. But what people fail to say when talking about this film is that for the first 2/3 of this, it really isn't a horror film. It starts off almost as a romantic comedy of sorts, with a widow trying to find a new wife, and he holds an audition, and he finds this woman who is really attracted to, is really mysterious. But the more he starts to know this woman, and the more we see of her, the more some things start to not make sense. And once he uncovers her past, weird things start to happen. And Takashi Miike is a prolific director. He loves making films in completely different genres, but I still think that Audition might be his crowning achievement. In terms of pacing and atmosphere, it blends things so well, And again, it culminates in an iconic moment that is disturbing and also perfect for the film he was going for, and kudos to him. We are now in the 2000s and we're nearing the end line, and the 2000s gave us so many great directors with fresh ideas for horror cinema, and one of my favorite ones of all time is Guillermo del Toro, and this 2001 film, The Devil's Backbone, is you can tell Del Toro really likes classic cinema and classic ghost stories, because this one has a lot of shades of films like The Innocents and The Haunting, because you have a ghost at the center of it, but the ghost is not the center of it. It's not about trying to discover who the ghost is. It's more about everything surrounding it, what the ghost represents, with the Spanish Civil War at hand, the lives of the people in an orphanage, and the unexploded bomb that's just sitting in the middle of the courtyard. It's a very powerful image, very haunting, as well as the one of the little ghost in the film. But the beauty of Del Toro is that he always flirts with horror, but he is always so understanding of the pain of his characters that you never feel scared of them. You feel more scared, connecting with other films on the list, you feel more scared of the human characters, of the villains of the film, more so than any ghost or creature ever could. And it's absolutely delightful, a great film, so many powerful performances in this, and an ending that kind of makes me weep a little bit. It's so good.
Algo muerto que parece por momentos vivo aún.
From South Korea, we have one of my all-time favorite directors, was Kim Ji-woon, and this 2003 A Tale of Two Sisters put him on the map. And it's a strongly influential film. It's incredibly clever with its twists and turns at the center of it. The homages to more J types of horror films like The Ring and The Grudge are present, but it's a very engaging story. It's a very tender tale of these two titular sisters without a mother and their relationship. It's a film that is deserving of 2 watches just to fully wrap your hand around what actually happened in it. But it's a very rewarding experience. It's a very tragic film as well, and you will get at the end of it feeling more sad than accomplished. It's a bit of a downer, but I still love it so much. And the director is just impeccable in how he crafts these scenes. And now another lesser-known film is Bug by William Friedkin. William Friedkin, he did not make that many horror films, but both The Exorcist and Bug are absolutely terrific and terrifying. Bug more so, I would say. It's very theatrical in structure and in nature, all set in just one location, one set, with 2, maybe 3 actors in the entirety of it. There's not a big cast here. But it's a story of paranoia, of government conspiracies, of mental illness, of a doomed romance that is completely unnerving, and Michael Shannon is an absolute beast in this. He goes to some really dark places, and I would say this is probably my favorite performance of his. He's both very charismatic and just disturbing as hell, as he always looks, but in this film he just owns it even more. And It's an example of less is more, and there's so little in this film that it makes up for everything else.
Agnes, look at me. I want you to pack a bag.
Now for the second and last horror found footage film on the list is the Spanish Wreck. And Wreck is... while I do love and appreciate a lot of Blair Witch Project, I come back to Wreck a lot more because it's so intense, it's so fast-paced, it's just relentless in the terror and the violence that is happening in an apartment building that's basically becoming infected by a virus that turns people into zombies. And the way it starts off as a normal documentary and it slowly becomes something else until it's just too late to turn back. It's minimalist, it's tense, it's disturbing, all the performances feel real and earnest, and it has a climax that will just like you have to hold your breath during it, it's just impossible to breathe. And sequels, they are a mixed bag, they're a mixed bag, but I think that this one just stands on its own wonderfully well, and what a tense experience. Let the Right One In by Thomas Alfredson, and I would say even kind of the American remake, Let Me In. It's a very, very different kind of horror film. It's a vampire tale about two kids. One is a normal kid, the other one is a vampire, it turns out. And they form a bond, they form a relationship that is very bittersweet. There are so many tender moments in this film, very human moments. They're just heartwarming, but then you have more disturbing elements to it, more sad elements. It's one of the saddest vampire films I've seen. There is a lot of darkness in it, but it's never overwhelming. There is always a shred of light, a shred of humanity, of hope in this film that I've always admired a lot. And it's also one of the coldest films on the list. There's so much snow in it and so much actual literal darkness from the night, but the key relationship between the two characters is just so strong and so beautiful. It'd be a shame not to watch this. And as I've said, the American remake as well does a very fine job with it. It's not bad, it's not terrible. It's essentially the same film, so take it as you will, but really good stuff. And one of my favorite vampire films.
Nej! Du får komma in!
And now for something completely different is Lars von Trier's Antichrist. Easily the most extreme film on the list. Disturbing from the get-go, beautifully shot. Charlotte Gainsbourg and Willem Dafoe give some of my favorite performances in the horror genre, Gainsbourg especially. She goes through different stages of grief in very unusual and overreacting ways, some might say. And it's a film that is worth analyzing over and over for so many different elements on it. A deconstruction of misogyny, of psychology, of religion, of grief. It's just a Lars von Trier film that happens to be very, very gory in the last moments, and just unnerving in how subtle it is in the first half. In small glimpses and small animal violence that's just, it's one of the most disturbing films I've ever seen, but you cannot shake it. It sticks to your core, to your soul, and it's one of my favorite Lars von Trier films as well, coincidentally. The last South Korean film on the list is also another film by Kim Ji-woon, and it is I Saw the Devil. This is a horror film more in the sense of the gore, more in the sense of the tension that you feel, but it's the story of a serial killer who murders the wrong woman, a secret agent's wife, and he gets hunted down, and he's actually found relatively early on, but it leads to a cat and mouse game that is brutal, unflinching, and it really makes you think about revenge and if it's worth it, more so than other revenge films have, because while the villain is absolutely horrible and disgusting, you see our hero do so many equally horrible acts of violence that it makes you think if it is all worth it in the end. And boy, what an ending it has. The last film on the list is Jennifer Kent's The Babadook, a story of grief, a story of a monster, a callback to silent films of the 20s, of Caligari, of Nosferatu. It's an absolute masterpiece of cinema in my opinion. I absolutely love The Babadook, and it has gotten a lot of crap over the years, mainly because of the annoying child figure at the center of it, but the kid is purposefully annoying. The kid is needed to make you feel the same despair that the single mother is going through, and it all leads to a second half that is strong, that is powerful, that is scary. And I saw this film back when it came out, and I've seen it many times ever since, and it never fails to surprise me just how well made it is. I absolutely love The Babadook.
I'm gonna go to bed.
So guys, this was a very long video. I can barely feel my voice. I've been talking for a long time now, but yes, I love all of these films. I want to know in the comments below which ones of these have you actually seen, which ones of these have you heard of, which haven't you seen. I recommend you watch most of these, not necessarily in this order, but just if something seems like it might appeal to you. If something doesn't seem too violent, doesn't seem too disturbing, just go for it. Go for it and explore. I think the horror genre is... it needs to lose the stigma of just being a cheap kind of genre, because there are so many films that have something to say, that are wonderfully made as far as art goes, and I just love it. It's so good. It's so good and so entertaining in so many different ways, and it would be a shame to deny yourself this kind of pleasure and knowledge. So please, let me know in the comments below which films you end up watching, what you think of them. Please come back to this video, and I hope you found something new to watch today. But still guys, thanks for watching. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.